So I'm George Cragg. I'm a network engineer at Draeger Medical Systems. We make medical devices that go on wired and wireless networks. You got my work email there, and also at the bottom at the link, there's some Wireshark captures that we will use later on in the session today, as well as they're posted onto the Discord session. So why would we want to do some Wi-Fi packet capture? As you may have noticed, as you guys attended this event, I don't think there were any other Wi-Fi sessions. It doesn't even really come up much. But I would say, at least in my world with children and what I see around me, Wi-Fi is exploding. Now with phones with 5G, that's Wi-Fi, different type of Wi-Fi, but it's still Wi-Fi. But the number of wireless devices that we all have, phones and tablets and laptops and everything all around us, it's exploding. So I would have expected a little bit more, coverage of this. So it seems to be like a niche field for now, but I think it'll grow. But anyway, so why would we want to do this? So some classes of problems really need this for root cause finding. They really do. And I say root cause finding in a little bit of a loose term. Sometimes with packet capture, we get root cause. Maybe we hit a home run, and that's nice. But a lot of times I'll use a packet capture, say, to isolate problems. What I tell my colleagues and my users at work is that I'm in the problem isolation business. Yeah, it's great if I can get root cause, but a lot of times I can't. I just don't know why your device didn't do what it was supposed to do. I can only tell you that it didn't do that. So we're kind of focused more on problem isolation, and good if we can hit that home run and get right to root cause. If it's a true network problem, that'd be great. Another thing we can do with Wi-Fi packet capture is protocol understanding. If anybody's had a peek at the 802.11 specification, it's about 3,500 pages long, and I got to tell you, it's a tough read. It's a really tough read. So, I learn a different way, so I'll use a Wi-Fi packet capture, maybe with some, Wikipedia entries, a little bit of RFC, some 802.11 spec, and then of course Wireshark, trying to see exactly what different stays or client stations and APs are doing. So some of the reasons why we'd want to do this. So why would we not want to do this? So I think this is a lot harder than typical wired capture. There's a lot of extra control and management traffic around that you have to deal with. And that also, as control traffic, deals or enables traffic to flow between devices that you won't have in the wired world. So there's, it's more complex. So it's everything that you need to do in the wired world. TCP still there, ARP still there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then I have all these other things that have to occur, in the right way to make traffic flow. You likely need special hardware, maybe software. Maybe you have to buy software now. You do need physical proximity. I can't get wireless traffic from your place where I am now, in the Boston area. You might need crypto material too. You should be using, decent security levels. Say WPA3 is preferred, WPA2 is okay. You should not be using WEP, but what that does is it hides things from us. If we want to use the information that we gather in a packet capture for analysis, I may need to decrypt it. I don't always have to do that, but I may have to, so I need crypto material. Also, it depends on the class of the problem. I may not need a Wi-Fi capture. Even though it's a wired device and there's a problem with it, I may not need a Wi-Fi packet capture. We'll talk about some of that later. It's difficult to manage packet loss. Since Wi-Fi is a shared medium, there's a lot of environmental constraints and concerns or things that could happen. If anybody remembers, turning on a microwave back in the day, that kind of has gone away now for the most part, at least with microwaves we bought in the last few years. But in the early days, you turn on your microwave and the Wi-Fi stopped on 2.4 gigahertz. That was kind of a problem. You have packet loss there between station and AP with your data flow, but also you have the concept of you have packet loss at the capture level. And that may or may not be the same as packet loss at the data flow level that you're trying to troubleshoot. Also, a lot of tools that you have that might automate some of your work don't work with Wi-Fi data. I tried some of the tools discussed in this year's SharkFest here. I've been on most of the sessions too, just like you guys. And I download them and I try them, and they just don't work for Wi-Fi traffic with 802.11 traffic. So we're kind of left to our own devices here. So some things we're going to need, some definitions. I'll call this an OTA capture, over the air. So that is really, it's a monitored mode capture, define that in a minute, with ideally an 802.11 header intact on top of the frame. And it'd be nice to get a link layer header as well that has some additional data for us. We'll talk about a little bit about what that gives me. So what is monitor mode? It's a special mode for wireless interfaces that keeps the 802.11 header intact. And also it adds another layer of metadata for us. Say the typical ones are radio tap or PPI. It adds that to the frame, and that's got things that really aren't, they're not bytes in the frame and they're not part of the data. However, they do indicate they do indicate what happened as the frame was passed. Say like signal strength, the received signal strength, or the data rate that came across, the MCS index, things like that. So it's very useful to have that. So to get an OTA capture with this kind of information, I need to have an adapter, a Wi-Fi adapter that will do monitor mode. And then hopefully it leaves the 802.11 header on top, because I want that information too. There's flags in there that can tell me how things are flowing, different kinds of information. So that's nice to have. And if I could get the pseudo header too, that would be great. So I can see how things are progressing as data is flowing. So typical radio behavior is that there's 3 types of traffic on the wireless side. There's management, control, and data traffic. Okay, so what's coming across the air has an 802.11 header. There's no radio tap header coming across. However, the 802.11 radio hopefully puts it on there, indicate the received signal strength, data rates, things like that. But the frame comes across, and management and control data frames management and control frames would be consumed and acted on by the radio to do whatever they need to do for delivery or to control, what network they're connected to, for roaming, things like that. But they're consumed. There's no need to send those up the stack when you're in typical, we'll call this manage mode, and contrast that to monitor mode. So we're in manage mode. So management and control are consumed by the radio, acted on if needed, or dropped otherwise. And data comes in with 802.11 header, but the 802.11 header is stripped off. It's converted into what would look like just an Ethernet 2 or an 802.3 frame, and that's passed up your stack. So if you just take your laptop or whatever device you have that's on wireless, and you're in manage mode as a station or client, and you're connected to some SSID, that's fine, right? Normal. And then you turn Wireshark on and you sniff on that interface, it's going to look like a wired interface. It's really tough to tell the difference, even though it is wireless, because the radio and the driver are converting that data, say, for you on your behalf. It's a pretty straightforward operation. The 802.11 headers that we're using typically nowadays have 3 addresses. So it comes in, there's a BSSID, which tells you what network you're on, and loosely that can relate to, say, like what VLAN you might be on from that concept in a loose way, or logically anyway. And the other two addresses are source and destination, and they can drop right into the Ethernet 2 header, and then away it goes up the stack for you to look at. But we want to go back one level, and we want to actually see the management frames, we want to see the control frames, and we want to see the data frames with these 802.11 headers intact. So that's what we're looking for. It's going to give us a lot of information about what's happening. So promiscuous mode, we probably all heard about that, and we use that, and we need that when we do wired captures, so you can get all the traffic up. So basically what we want to do is inform the network driver and the interface to pass up all frames. So turn off filtering. What would normally happen is if a unicast frame came in to the interface, it would be dropped if it's not for that interface. That and the driver know their MAC address, and if it's for them, they'll pass it up. If it's broadcast, they'll pass it up. Or multicast, they'll pass it up. But if it's unicast for someone else, they would drop it. So we do need promiscuous mode as well, but I do see some confusion, say, searching the internet and other things with my colleagues, that monitor mode does not necessarily imply promiscuous mode. Often you get both at the same time, but there are examples where that's not true. Okay, so a couple of examples where it's not true. The Carl 9170 driver from about 2012 to 2017 that would go into monitor mode, but promiscuous mode wasn't supported. So what does that mean? Only broadcast packets were sent up. So I did get the 802.11 header, but usually I just got beacons and probe requests and some other things. I didn't get any unicast traffic. And that's not particularly useful when I'm trying to do an OTA capture and trying to troubleshoot a problem between a stay and an AP. So that's one example where it isn't true. And another one, the mid 4 series kernels, there was an RA link Linux driver And I consider it regression, certainly for my use case, where I buy these adapters almost like candy to take wireless packet capture. Regression cycled in and out of the driver in the kernel, and they did the same thing. So I test it one day and everything's fine. I get monitored mode and promiscuous mode, everything's sent up, say unicast frames for other devices besides me. It's great. I go buy some hardware, it takes a couple of weeks to come in. I put the system together and it doesn't work anymore. So did I screw up? I have to check, right? So it turns out it was a change in the driver. And we had problems with CentOS 6 as well. They use a 2 series kernel, at least, a couple of years back when we stopped using it. But they, I think they backported the driver, and that ended up in the CentOS 6 series kernels, and I couldn't use those anymore with the RA-Link chipsets. So I had to stop upgrading kernels, and then finally we just moved distributions to make that problem go away. But it does come up, and it is a problem. So when people say I can't do something, I kind of have to know, what you use to take the packet capture with, so we can understand like where you are and make sure you have the right hardware, the right drivers, and other things. But this is just some of the complexity we run into trying to get an OTA capture. So we need a radio system. So this is hardware. I just need an antenna and a radio to receive these frames. I'm not an electrical engineer. Talk to the hardware guys. Some of you may have seen this Wi-Fi cactus. He's got this device at DEF CON a few years back, walking around with lots of different radios, lots and lots of different radios. Well, it's one of the things we kind of need here. It's one radio per channel in general. You can channel hop, but it's not that effective for troubleshooting. It's good for surveying, and that's fine. And you can channel hop and take one radio and cycle through channels. But it's really not that effective when I'm trying to troubleshoot a device, and an access point and its communication flow, and trying to understand the communication profile between it and get the context. It's not effective, because when I'm not on that channel that they are, I'm missing the traffic, and I need to see all the traffic to troubleshoot. So some summary requirements here. I need a radio interface per channel, right? And you can have many channels in your infrastructure, so it can get complicated, right? I need to have that radio support monitor in promiscuous mode. I have to be in physical proximity. I could be in the parking lot, so maybe I don't have to be that far, but I do need some physical proximity. And I may need other things, right? This may not be enough. This is the minimum. This just gets us started. I may need crypto information if I want to do some decryption and have a look at the data as it goes across. So some requirements of what we're going to need here. So we have different problem classifications here, right? Not all problems need OTA capture. Some do, some don't, but not all do. But if we have a look at the top, if we look at like a wireless frame, so there are some other headers that came across that aren't passed up to Wireshark, like PLCP, a preamble, etc. Not that important for us, but I have an 802.11 header, basically, logical link control LLC header, and then IP and TCP. So if my problem lies, say at L3, the internet protocol, at the network layer or above, right, I might be in luck. If you look down, what's the AP do? As we saw a couple slides ago, I take this wireless frame, I strip off the 802.11 header, I pull the information out of it, I build myself an Ethernet 2 frame in general, right? But for the most part, I keep the network and above layers intact. So if I have a problem at the internet layer, the network layer, or TCP, or specific application problem, right? Maybe I don't really need to even look at it at the 802.11 layer, right? If it's more complex and it's harder and I've got decryption to do, well, I might not really even want to go there unless I have to. So I would say that for layer 3 and above, I can usually get by with a wired capture, or certainly I want to start there because I find it easier to analyze. There are some exceptions to this. What else can the AP change? Well, it can change almost anything, but for what I see in general, the exception to this is like QoS could be adjusted, the DSCP field, right? That can be manipulated. So if you're chasing that type of issue, that could matter to you, and you might want to see it at the wireless level and the wired level as well at the same time to see how that's being manipulated. MSS clamping, things like that can occur. And also it's important to note that not all problems need decryption either. If you don't know what the problem is, you don't know if you need decryption or not. So it's best to always be able to do it. But I got to tell you, I grab wireless packet captures probably every day, and I decrypt, I'd say rarely, right? Just don't have to do it that often. Especially if you know the protocol that's in use, or you have some feel for the context, you know the data flow, you know the communication profile. You can get by a lot of times with say timing analysis. You know, what's the delta T on the different packets, the different types. Remember, the MAC address still is in clear text, even if you are using secure data, which again you should be using. So you can do timing analysis. You can also do size analysis if you know what's going on. But that's not always effective. Sometimes you really need to know to dig in, and you will need to decrypt. But you know. So here's some example. Here is an example of some difficulties in using 802.11 captures for TCP analysis in particular, right? So recall TCP provides for us a reliable ordered byte stream. So we have the concept of a TCP retransmission, but we have to compare that to what an 802.11 retry is as well. And we want to compare the difference, right? We also have a quick discussion about packet loss and how it affects us here. So TCP retransmission, from my point of view, in 30 seconds, you've had lots of TCP over the past 2 days from some really good experts floating around. I am not one of them, but here's my quick view on what a TCP retransmission is and how it works, and how do we make TCP reliable. Well, TCP puts bytes on the wire and starts a timer. If you don't get an ACK for those bytes when the timer expires, you send the bytes again. That secret sauce for the different TCP algorithms and what exactly to do, what the RTO is and all that, yep, that's great. But at the end of the day, it's a timer. And when it triggers, you send the bytes again. That's a TCP retransmission from this very simple point of view. So is this exactly the same segment, packet, and frame? Typically, no, it's not exactly the same. So we have a quick look. Here are some decrypted wireless traffic. So I apologize. This and the next screenshot aren't in the captures that I've given you. The captures I gave you are of 802.11 traffic, but it's not decryptable. But anyway, so here's a TCP retransmission. So it's from my lab. I turn it on and I wait till a packet gets lost, which happens in Wi-Fi. So it doesn't take very long. And so it's sequence 25 at frame 23 here, right? We can see I called out IP ID. So we have IP ID 14431, great. And then all of a sudden we get a TCP retransmission. So what does that mean? Well, I didn't get an ACK. Well, with my filter, I've got IP source and TCP link greater than 0. So I've actually filtered out any ACKs. But context should kind of tell you what's going on. Those first few frames, you know, Wireshark does a good job with like some default coloring here. You can presume the ACKs got there. You know, think about it. Yes, it is true you don't see that ACK frame, but look at the context. How did the other peer in the communication react? You know, he accepted it without any issue. You can open, if you had this trace, you could open up the filter and see those ACKs, and that would work. And I can assure you that they're there, but from context, you can tell. So at frame 23, those 4 bytes go across. It looks like, what is this client doing? So let's see. So 4 bytes, about every 5 seconds, you see the delta T column. So you can imagine that's probably like a keep alive. Yep. Okay, so 4 bytes every 5 seconds, it's fine, it goes. We need an ACK, and we didn't get one. So what happened with frame 24? About 250 milliseconds later, 243, right, we get a new packet, and we could tell it's a new packet because the IP ID incremented. That's convenient. We're not fragmenting here, so I don't really need to have an IP ID that increments. A lot of stacks do, and it's convenient. So we make use of that information when we have it available to us. It's just free information. And as you can see that we retransmitted the TCP segment a couple of times, and each time the IP ID incremented. And you could look at the timing, 250 milliseconds, and the delta T, almost 500, and then 1 second, and you can see the exponential back off, you know, typical behavior. So this is a TCP retransmission. So it's not exactly the same, right? The IP ID is different, so it's a different packet, but the bytes are the same. So will the bytes always be the same? No. Imagine that right after frame 23, those 4 bytes go out, right? So that's fine. But what if the sender had more bytes to send? If the window had space, he might just send them anyway. And so this the retransmission could actually have more bytes later on, right? So you can't guarantee that the segment will always be the same. The segment could get bigger, or I guess even smaller if you get a partial ACK that comes back. And, I have to retransmit a certain amount of data. So that's what a retransmission might look like, at a basic level as a review. But what's a retry? So 802.11 provides a link layer acknowledgement. What we had before was a transport layer protection scheme for reliability. But what 802.11 provides me is a link layer scheme for reliability, right? So this is to protect data as well, again, at a lower layer. And it's a similar concept. So you've heard this before. You transmit and set a timer. If you don't get an ACK, in this case, it's an 802.11 ACK. When the timer expires, you transmit again with the retry bit set, often at a reduced data rate, right? Depends on the rate selection algorithm they're using, with the concept being if the first one was lost, i.e. I didn't get an ACK, right? I probably sent that at high data rates, highly modulated, which is more subject to interference and loss. So maybe if I step down a bit, right, I'll have a higher reliability of getting the data through. So that's the idea with that. So often at a reduced data rate, you could see that in the capture sometimes. So, but you have a retry bit here. And then, well, what do you do when you run out? If you retry a certain number of times, then give up. I've seen anywhere from 8 retries to 40, right? And sometimes it's adjustable. And in the 802.11 header, there's a flags field. And in particular, there's a retry bit here. And so the first one will come out with the retry bit clear. And then again, if you don't get the ACK in a certain amount of time, and that time is defined in the 802.11 specification, and that time is dependent on the time that you need to transmit your frame in the ACK. And there's some nav timers, part of the CSMA, CA things, and things like that. But anyway, if you don't get the ACK in time, you will retry, and you will set that bit high, and that bit will be set for each time it's sent after that until you get it through or it's dropped. So here is another TCP, here's another data loss indicated. Different device, though interestingly enough, by dumb luck, the sequence number again at 25 before we got failure. But notice I pulled out IP ID again in a column, but we also have a sequence number as part of the 802.11 header. So let's go ahead and use that to our advantage. What does that look like? You can see at the beginning of the capture, the .11 sequence number, increments, probably every frame. He's sending other traffic besides this. And again, I have it filtered with just one way and just one TCP stream. There's UDP and other TCP coming out of this device. I know that. And IP ID increments, again, in this case, it's pretty linear. Every other, that's great, but there's no requirement for that. But what happens when loss is indicated? So again, we're filtered, so I'm not showing all the control and management traffic, but imagine for those first couple, we did get an ACK, an 802.11 ACK from the AP. We did, and then we don't get one. Again, context kind of tells you that. So here we are, right? So here we are at frame 1666, and notice the .11 sequence number is a 34, and the IP ID is 30209. All right, but look at the timing now. In the previous case, these are the same TCP stacks, by the way. It was about 250 milliseconds before we got the retransmission. So that was the RTO. But here I am at 1.9 milliseconds. I didn't get an ACK. And here I am sending a retry. I've got the retry bit called out. So the first one, the bit's clear, and then the retry bit is set. But notice the 802.11 retry, the .11 sequence number stays the same, and the IP ID stays the same, but the retry bit would then go high for each one. And look at the timing. So again, 1.9 milliseconds for the first retry to come out until we get to completion, pretty quick. And we're looking at so 84.61 to 84.62. So 4 milliseconds, give or take, to get all those retries out. But notice, what did Wireshark call these? It called them out as TCP retransmissions, but they are not TCP retransmissions. They're actually retries, right? They're different. We didn't get an RTO. These retries won't get sent up the stack. They'll be consumed by the radio. Well, actually, he didn't get them, right? Because he didn't send the ACK back. So they're just handled differently, and they're not TCP retransmissions. So again, I filtered the trace. They all have the same .11 sequence number. We set the retry bit. Wireshark is in fact lying to us because they're not TCP retransmissions, but we have some clues. The timing, the retry bit, the IP ID is constant and not 0. So it gives us some good information about that. But now talk for a second, look at the bottom one, TCP ACT unseen segment. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells me that one of the peers ACT TCP data, but this Wireshark instance in this context didn't see it. So how do I interpret that, right? That's an example of OTA packet loss. Well, and even if you saw it in Wired, it'd be an example, in my opinion, of, say, capture packet loss. The actual data stream didn't get lost because the peers seemed to be happy that data got through, but I didn't see it, right? So that's OTA packet loss, I would call it. So the way I interpret that, the real host reception of data was fine, but the OTA missed it. So we can kind of look at the context and kind of tell. Now, is that important to me? I don't know. It depends on the problem. If I needed to see that, say, application data of that, say, data segment, well, then it does matter. I do need to pick it up. It was delivered and acted on, but I don't know what it was and I want to see it. Maybe that was the HTTP GET I was looking for. I don't know, and I wouldn't have it. It got delivered and something happened, but we wouldn't know. So it depends on the problem. I don't know if I need it or I don't until we know what the actual problem is. So that's kind of compare and contrast the 11 retries and TCP retransmissions. So context is certainly important. So packet loss at the OTA capture does not necessarily imply packet loss between station and the AP. And the converse is also true, right? The OTA capture can see the frame just fine. That does not guarantee that the stay and the AP had a clean communication. Context should help us with that. If I'm seeing the packets and they're fine, yet they're still being retried, that's a clue that the AP or the stay didn't actually pick them up. So we may have to troubleshoot that in a particular way. And also Wireshark can lie to us sometimes. If if we interpret those as TCP retransmissions, and that's important to what we're doing, then that would be a problem. So we'd have to understand the difference and how that system behaves. I strongly prefer to analyze TCP and other protocols at layer 3 and above via wired capture to avoid some of the subtlety, right? Especially with the packet loss. It's really hard to follow TCP streams with packet loss in play, even if it's not real, because you're just missing the data. And then when all the retries are indicated as, and they're almost always retries, certain percentage, right? It can be, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30% retry, all depends. If they're all listed as TCP retransmissions, it's really hard for me to figure out what's going on. So I much prefer to use a wired capture for that type of analysis. So, good, better, best, I'll take what I can get. It all depends on the problem. It depends on who we're dealing with, where in the world, what the capabilities are, what hardware they have. But if you could give me wired and decryptable OTA at the same time, that's clearly best. I don't know if I always need it. And in fact, I'm sure that I almost always don't need it at that level. But, if you have to fly to that customer site to pick up data, you might as well go ahead and get that and avoid, having me look at the trace and saying, what, this is one of those classes of problems where I really need to decrypt the OTA. So you got to go back and get that for me. And that's got its own challenges, getting EA poll, if it's even possible. So, and, if you're using an enterprise system, if anybody's familiar with that, they have controllers a lot of times, they do tunnel mode. So I might even need 3 captures. I need a decryptable OTA. I need a wire capture at the controller. Say that's the point of demarcation from, say, the customer network in general on the VLANs to the controller. But then the controller sends those frames, in a tunnel, say CapWAP or otherwise, to the AP. And, oftentimes that if I'm dealing with vendors in different customer sites, we're trying to figure out what the root cause of the problem is, having this level of detail and trying to figure out where loss comes from, it's kind of helpful. So, but that's hard to get, I got to tell you, especially for, if I'm not there and dealing with IT teams, asking them to get all this information for us, it could be quite a challenge, but that's perfect. In a perfect world, that's what we would get. But we all know we don't live in those perfect worlds. So Some problems where we would benefit from having an OTA capture. So anything that's 802.11 specific, like the association process, the authentication process. I especially like it when you're doing WPA2 Enterprise and you're doing, ETLS or EPEEP or one of those. An OTA capture is invaluable in my opinion in figuring out what's going on and where it's breaking and who's not, keeping up their end of the bargain. Latency is another one. Figuring out where latency is setting up, across a network. Again, customer of ours would be a hospital. They'll have some major vendor of Wi-Fi equipment that they spent millions of dollars for, Cisco, Aruba, Fortinet, Extreme, whatever. And then they have millions of dollars worth of medical equipment, ours and other companies, right? And then, something isn't working and they're just looking and saying, help us, figure out what's wrong. And then, as a team, we've got to figure out what it is. So where's the latency set up? Hopefully we're not pointing fingers at each other. I never like to point to the other guy unless I know and have data to suggest that's true. I know I'm not always the benefit of that, but anyway, it is what it is. I'm sure you guys all deal with that as well. Also, loss. Where does loss come in? Right when sometimes customers contact support for the Wi-Fi vendor. Oh, we don't lose data. It's not us. If data's lost, you got to talk to the client. The device because they didn't send it. We don't lose data. Well, I might need an OTA capture to prove that we sent it and then you didn't accept it or whatever it might be. So anyway, to summarize here, this little section, we don't always need an OTA capture. When an OTA capture is called for, having the related wired capture, at the same time can be a great benefit. Latency analysis, for example, benefits from both. Being able to compare to see where that latency would set up and just prove very quickly, what's happening. So, but our current discussion today is about collecting captures here, so we can do some future discussions on how to solve our real world problems. I've got some good examples, so we'll set those up. But hardware. So we need hardware with a driver to make this work. Not just anything will do, but exactly what you need depends on many factors. What's the problem at hand, right? What's the system under review? What are the stays and APs? What environment are you in? Lots of different choices, right? So some of the options we have, not exhaustive list here, right? Not exhaustive at all. So we have dedicated systems like Fluke, Ekahau, and there's some others who make those. They probably export as a PCAP or PCAP NG. I still like looking at data in Wireshark, even if the other system has their own little collection system. So a pros, it probably works. You're probably spending a lot of money for it too. Maybe not that flexible. You spend $10,000, whatever the number might be, and it's got a certain capability, and that's it. And then a new draft or a new 8.11 revision comes out. We're at AX now, and who knows what's next. The next one comes out, and that device won't pick up the latest traffic, and that's fine. Mac OS, MacBooks, they're pretty great for this. They generally just work for me. I've heard of problems, but in about 10 years or so, I can't say it's always smooth, but I've always been able to get Wi-Fi packet captures off of them. And it's great, right? Little tip, Air Tool from Adrian Granados. I don't know him, but that tool used to be free. Now it's a small price, but it's worth it. Highly recommended for that. It makes capture on the Mac so much easier. Downside of the Mac is one radio. So if you want to, say, troubleshoot roaming problems, you're in a little bit of trouble, okay, because you have one radio. So then all of a sudden I need 2 MacBooks. Well, that's not so bad, and that's great. But like, say, for the company I work for, to pick on them for a minute, we focused on, say, Intel-based hardware from Dell or whatever, Lenovo, whoever it might be. And they don't really like Macs within the company, so it becomes difficult to buy them. And also, if you need to say replicate problem might not happen all the time, you might not know the trigger. You might need to just have ring buffer with data capture running overnight. You can put your MacBook in that public location just fine. The issue is tomorrow morning when you go back to look for your data, your MacBook probably isn't going to be there unless you locked it in some particular location. So it's a nice thing to steal. So another downside. So Windows with native, don't have much luck with that. Wish you all the luck in the world. I avoid it. Suggest to avoid, the good days with AirPCAP. AirPCAP NX, you could buy the 3-pack. Worked in Wireshark, you had that toolbar for those. Those were good days. Those were good days. We don't live in those days anymore. There are other third-party products like OmniPeak and Tamos ComView, acrylic Wi-Fi. There are other systems that you can pay for. Some of them are very expensive that can do Wi-Fi packet capture, and that's fine. And I'm sure most of them can export SPCAP-NG as well, if you'd like. But anyway, for the most part, I focus on Mac because it's native. Just turn on Wireshark with AirTool, put it in monitor mode, turn on Wireshark, you're in business. Or Linux. Linux is so flexible, robust, and of course it could be inexpensive by small little embedded devices. Even Raspberry Pi can pick up traffic. So plenty of options, but a downside is you need Linux skills. It's okay if you have them. It's actually great if you have them. You know, get a lot of mileage out of that, but I don't know, in my company, we have maybe low number of thousands of field engineers, you know, field service guys, field service team that we have to support that actually support the end customer directly. And they're the ones I might need to get a packet capture out of. And Linux skills just aren't that high with that group of people. You know, they're great at what they do, but just, you know, deep knowledge on Linux skills and Wi-Fi packet capture isn't one of those things. So it's somewhat of a barrier. So a Mac with direct access is better, and even a Windows solution for them, even if I don't prefer it, for them is actually preferred. So anyway, pros and cons. There's also enterprise wireless systems. So, you know, again, the big players, you know, you spend millions on this wireless system. Guess what? Some have the ability to collect an OTA capture, which is great, convenient, no question. But for me, I've needed to use this twice professionally, and there's been an Achilles heel both times. Well, but let's say the 0 time, there's a general rule in troubleshooting. Some of you may agree. You don't use the system to evaluate itself. You know, we don't know root cause, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if it's the client. There's 3 buckets here with Wi-Fi, right? Is it the stay, the client? Is it the access point or the wireless system, or is it the environment? In general, those are it. I mean, there's other failure points too, but in general, when I'm trying to isolate problems, that's the first bucket I'm looking for. And so if I don't know if the Wi-Fi system is a problem or not, you know, using that to evaluate itself is always suspect. So first of all, so vendor number 1, not to name names, turns out they don't pass all the control traffic to the mirror. You know, you set up an OTA capture, whatever they do, they write it to disk, they stream it to an FTP, whatever they might do. Well, they don't move the control traffic. Turns out when you use power safe mode, that control traffic is critical in, say, downlink behavior. Like the client wakes up, issues control traffic to have the AP then downlink traffic to it. Well, if there's data missing and you're trying to troubleshoot that problem and that control traffic isn't present, you don't know what's going on and you can't prove anything. So Achilles heel, couldn't use it. Another one was a different vendor. They off-channel scanned. So imagine, so every, I don't know, every second for 300 milliseconds, maybe every second for 30 milliseconds, they'd go off channel, go scan and do something else and then come back. Well, while they're off channel, they're not accepting packets. So imagine your stay or your client is sending traffic. If he doesn't know that you're off channel and he sends a frame, you might not get it. And imagine if that's TCP, well, TCP should figure it out, right? We have reliability there through the retransmission mechanism, and that's great. But if it's UDP, no such luck. There's no transport layer protection mechanism for reliability there. And so you can run into a lot of trouble. So they were off-channel scanning. Well, they had a capture technique. They didn't want my OTA capture. They wouldn't take it. They refused. They said their development team would only take theirs, and they had to look at it. And when they do, they say, you know, there's no traffic missing here. It's all here. Well, you can only get past to your collection point what your radio accepted. If your radio is missing it, so is your capture system. So there's a whole class of problems that they couldn't capture and they couldn't analyze with their system. So anyway, finally, they would take the OTA capture and the issue is quite clear for them. So always an Achilles heel. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse nowadays. I don't know, but I just try to go in and I need to be prepared for these kind of problems. So we always have another system in place. So, but this is the meat of the discussion really, is a capture envelope, right? So editorial evidence is complex. There's many specifications. It's an alphabet soup, ABGN, ACAX. There's security standards, performance changes, reliability, things that go on, right? So another rule we have, the OTA capture system needs same or better capabilities than does the system under test. For example, you can't pick up 11AX modulated traffic with an 11B radio. It's not going to work. Not unlike, so in a similar way, if you have a 40 gigabit link and you're trying to mirror that to a 10/2 interface, you're not going to be happy. Same thing here. I'm not going to see that kind of traffic in my capture. So we need to plan for this and address it and deal with it. So it's kind of important for us. It's actually a big issue for those first starting in Wi-Fi capture. So I hear all over the place, I want an adapter that works for everything. Cheap, always works, will always work in the future, right? Supported by Windows, because that's what I use. Well, you know what? That's a unicorn. It doesn't really exist, and we're going to have to compromise. So what to choose? It all depends. I don't know what to choose. We got some best guesses. We can get started, but this is a process. As we saw earlier, you know, with the packet doctors as they were going through the traces, you know, earlier, it's a process that you go through. You don't always get to the answer, but the idea is, you know what, be in a position to know what I'm going to do next, even if you don't have all that you need to make the answer. So what is the problem? What does the system support? And that helps us drive towards a solution of how we're going to move forward. Where am I going to get this capture from? So here's the list. It's wordy. We're going to talk about these, but empirically, as in my career, this is what I've come across. The top 5 are really the ones that I need to get out of the way. These have tripped me up with captures in the past, so I always make sure that these are in good shape. You know, band and technology has to match, number of spatial streams, channel width. That's not that big of a deal from a you know, a high density professional deployment, because most people are running 20 megahertz, 40, 80, 160s home use kind of stuff for the most part. You know, there's always exceptions, but in general, high density environments are at 20, so that's not that big a deal. And SGI and LDPC. Newer devices don't have a problem with that, but older ones did, and we would run into that. And then, of course, say with a whole slew of new technologies, beamforming, OFDMA, blah, 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 again, alphabet soup kind of stuff and stuff to come in the future can all affect how this is going to work. But certainly the first 5, let's take care of those and get those knocked out. And then we can move on to other challenges that we might have in collecting traffic. So capture envelope, you know, I've got to be on the right band, 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. We got 6 gigahertz now. Note, remember, one radio implies one channel at a time for the type of kind of packet capture I would want. Again, if you're surveying, hopping's good, no trouble. But if you're trying to troubleshoot a problem between devices, you probably need to stay on that channel. Or if you're doing some kind of roaming, you probably need multiple radios to look at that. So here's a question from Wireshark, askwireshark.com. I copied it. How do I capture HTTP packets? I've already set up a decryption key for WPA, WPA2. Well, all right. Well, it's harder than that, right? It's a lot harder than that. So I imagine, and again, I'm guessing here. I don't know. I just took that question, and let's kind of talk about what we need here from the top down. Let's say they have a problem with their GET requests, right? So they want to see what's inside the TCP segment, right? What's there? What's inside the HTTP packet? What's the GET request? That's what they're trying to troubleshoot. Again, just hypothetically, right? So I want to see that. So I need HTTP packets for sure. All right. So that's application layer. So I want to see application layer stuff on Wi-Fi. So I need decryption capability. Okay. Right. Again, if that was the specific problem, I don't know, I might try to go over to a wired capture, but I don't know. They're asking for Wi-Fi. Let's see what we can do. So I need decryption. But to be able to decrypt something, I need those data frames to decrypt. So this is what we're talking about. I need to be able to pick up those data frames to decrypt so we can see HTTP, so I can see the GET request, right? So how do we know what we need? And how do I know if what I have is good enough? Okay. So a couple of ways, experience. I've solved this problem before. For instance, I work at a company. We make devices that have radios. I know their capabilities. So I have experience in there. I know what's good enough. Documentation, we'll talk about that. But really the fun stuff here, we're at a Wireshark conference, right? Can we reverse engineer using a packet capture to figure out what these capabilities are? Short answer, yes. That's why we're here. So here's some documentation. WikiDevi was good, that closed. So they made DeviWiki, which is awesome. So it tells me, like in the upper right-hand corner, here's a new Wi-Fi 6 2 spatial stream. Not a lot of information. This one actually has more with these flags. A lot of them are pretty thin with info, but it's something. It gets you started. And the IW command can be useful as well on Linux or Linux. Sorry. So it tells me monitor mode supported. That's good. Doesn't mean it's fully functional, but if it's not there and just as managed, well, then you're in a little bit of trouble and you have to get a different adapter. So I can see LDPC, that's listed there, short guard interval, that's a good sign. And it tells me there are 2 spatial streams. So that kind of, told me what I need to know. So that's good from that standpoint. That's when I have access to that, but I don't always have access to that. Another kind of rule here, we know communications, the profile will be, it'll prefer the highest data rates, modulations in common. Okay, so if one does 8 spatial streams and one does 2, well, the max is 2 of them. So we're going to try to do the highest. If SGI is supported, we'll use it. LDP is supported, we'll use it. If AX is preferred over AC, over N, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of need to know the worst case. So I need to know what the station supports. I need to know what the AP supports. And then we can find, say, the minimum between them, and then that will be the communication profile that I need to cover. From an AP standpoint, pretty good news. Control and management frames generally use low data rates and modulations, okay, and those are easy to pick up, so that's good. So I'm going to be looking for beacon frames here, right? So if I look for beacons, you use a Wi-Fi scanner, figure out what channel you're on, et cetera, use your phone, what have you, but so in this particular case, I set up a WLAN SSID. So here's a filter, but really for beacons, type subtype is 8. So if you look at one of the packet captures we provided, so if we look at, I have the folder open, subset 1, we can look at a beacon. So there's a beacon. Let's have a look at a beacon. Let's not go full screen. So there we go. So maybe I can make the font a little bigger. Hopefully everybody can see that. So here's a beacon. You can just see them, right? I already filtered the trace, but you can put in that filter if you need to, especially if it's big. But I took care of that. So here's the wireless management for the beacon. If we look at tag parameters, I can have a look in here and we can see kind of right away some information that we're looking for. So first of all, I know I'm on 5 gigahertz, current channel 165. All right, so that's good. HT, 802.11n. So I know we support 802.11n. VHT, so HT high throughput, VHT very high throughput. That's AC supported. And HE, so this is 11AX. This is an 11AX access point. All right, let's open, see what else we can find. So if I look in HT and I look at the capabilities, LDPC, supported, check. Short guard interval, check. 20 megahertz only, channel 165, that's expected. So that's good. How many spatial streams? That'll tell me 2. Right here, MCS, 4 spatial streams for 802.11n. Awesome. We know that. What about VHT? How many spatial streams? Kind of expect the same. We'll see. Here we go. MCS map, 1, 2, 3, 4 spatial streams. Awesome. We know. What about HE? How many spatial streams for HE could we have? Here we go. We support, in fact, 8 spatial streams for HE. So this looks like it's a Cisco product, looks like it's their highest end. So 8 spatial streams. So we just picked out all the information we need right out of the packet capture. So we know what the AP does. We know what his capabilities are. So that's great. So here I do just call them out, but we just did it by hand, right? So we know I can't do 160. I'm sure the AP will do it eventually. Maybe it's a configuration issue, but LDPC, SGI, I've got it all. I've got spatial streams. We saw all that. That's great. So we know what he does. So that's the AP summary. If you want to know the max data rates, well, go to mcsindex.com. We'll show you a quick example at the end here of that where we use that. But we also have to know what the stay supports, right? But it's the same exercise, but you use the association request. That's the difference here. So we use the beacon, but we use an association request. So that's type 0. So WLAN, I have it, subtype in 0. There's only 1 in here. And in this case, it's similar story. Tag parameters. So in this case, I have HT and VHT. So that's an 802.11 AC or, not HE adapter. Well, okay. So we know that, but interest of time, we'll cut to the chase here. That's what he supports. And we can look that up. The station supports 20 megahertz. He's AC, 2 spatial stream, LDPC, and SGI. The station has less capability than the AP. That's controlling, right? So the capture systems need to support that at a minimum to pick up all the traffic. All right, I might not pick up traffic for other clients' stays, but for this one, I will. So what does my adapter support? My capture adapter? That could be a little trickier. Again, experience. Maybe you know how to look at a trace and can see. So at this point, we can kind of tell. Linux IW command is great. DeviWiki website. Also, if you have to, configure the adapter, say using, WPA supplicant to connect to the same access point and look at his association request. So put him in manage mode, have him connect, look at that, and then you kind of know what he does. I've heard that sometimes that the monitor mode capability is not the same as manage mode. I've heard that. I've never seen that in real life. So anyway, something to look out for. Now we have 2 examples, and we're going to finish up here. So number one is we're going to take a packet capture with this RA link device. He's ABGN 3 spatial stream. He does SGI. Okay, that's what he does. So what's the gap? Remember, I need AC because that's what the stay did, VHT, and LDPC. So that's a gap. So anything sent with VHT modulation or LDPC, I won't be able to pick it up. Not a good capture adapter for our system. Okay, wouldn't be preferred. Actually, I wouldn't use it. All the data is missing, or most of the data will be missing. Example 2, I use a brand new Intel AX210. That's an AX based, so pretty much anything less than that would be supported. 2 spatial streams, LDPC, SGI. We're in good shape. So there's no gap. So that's good for us. So what does it look like? So what does bad look like? So let's look at VHT capture 2 real quick. It's pretty simple to tell. It's quite fast to tell. So I come, say, right here. Let's look right here. Request to send, clear to send acknowledgement. Request to send, clear to send acknowledgement. RTS, CTS, ACK. What's he acking? Well, he's acking data frames. Well, where are they? Well, I don't have the capture envelope big enough to actually pick them up. I can't pick up AC traffic with this adapter. He can only do end. They're there with context, I can tell, but I can't pick them up. So this isn't much use for me, right? I've got EA poll. I see some traffic from the device. I do. I've got keys. I can decrypt, but there's not a whole lot to decrypt here because I just can't pick it up. So that's what bad looks like. Not good. Not good. We don't want that. So what does good look like? What does good look like? Let's clear out this filter and let's have a look what good looks like. And slide down and say right here, RTS, CTS data, 78 megabits. And what's its PHY type? AC, that's VHT. Great. So I'm picking it up. Okay, I'm picking up QS data, and then it's ACT, RTS, CTS data. Whereas we didn't see it before, we're seeing it now. I'm able to pick up AC traffic. So that's great. So let's look at the max that we would have, the max data rate that we would have here. So I like this radio information, pseudo field. So prepare as filter selected. So, and we can filter on data rate. So let's go to the max. So 173.3 is the max data rate that I see. Is that consistent with what we would expect? Is it consistent? Well, we saw that data frames, right? We saw VHT modulation. So here we go. We see the max observed is 173.3. So if you go to the MCS index table, here's a little screenshot of it. So if I go down to 2 spatial streams, 20 megahertz, so that's where we are, right? Short guard interval, I get the max 173.3, and that's what I see. Does it prove that everything's correct? No, but it's certainly consistent with what we would expect from a technical point of view. So I then conclude that my capture's pretty healthy. And let's hope I've got good proximity and I got everything else I need, maybe a wired capture that goes with it. Maybe we can make some headway in troubleshooting the problem. So this is how we use that. So we'll finish up here with a summary. So some problems do benefit from wireless OTA packet capture, but not all. I find it a lot harder than typical wired capture. So it's pretty much everything you want to follow with wired captures, you know, all that behavior, network behavior. And then we've got all this extra control and management traffic and 3,500 pages of IEEE 802.11 specification to follow. So probably need special hardware. You may or may not have it. You need special software, put it in special modes, physical proximity. Well, you need that for wired too, right? You know, typically you got to go plug into somewhere, put a tap in or something. So you might need crypto material as well. Maybe you can get that out of the site. Maybe you can't. If you're using 802.11, WPA2 Enterprise, you know, it's really tough, not impossible, but really tough to get that decrypted on purpose. And WPA3 is quite problematic as well. That's the whole point of the security, actually. Also, it's often not needed. You know, maybe we can get a lot of mileage out of using other techniques, so we don't have to use this. And we have to manage packet loss, both in the real data stream, as well as what we can conclude from an OTA packet capture. So with that, I finish. And so see if we have any questions, comments, concerns. So we have anything lined up? Is vendors 2 behavior common, or is that unique to them? I would say a lot of vendors do the off-channel scanning. Actually, most of them do. However, what I've seen with the newest access points is, especially the higher end stuff, they include a separate radio to do that kind of scanning, to do security analysis and scanning, and that limits the actual radios doing the data traffic from being off channel. Favorite dongles for Linux OS Wi-Fi capture. So, well, again, it all depends on what you're trying to troubleshoot. There's no magic bullet here. What I really like are the new Intel AX adapters, but they're PCI based, right? Mini PCI. So, or M2, what have you. So they're a little tougher to get at, but the RA Link ones are good. The MediaTek stuff is good as well. There are some AC, 802.11 AC USB 2 spatial stream MediaTek. I think 7612, that rings a bell. The RTL stuff works too. That's not built into the kernel at this point. So the 8812 is a 2 spatial stream. The 8814 is a 3 spatial stream AC. So that's good. I don't think I've seen a USB AX chip yet. So I'm not sure those are around. So can OTA capture multi-AP issues? Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of the issue, right? It's a shared, can OTA capture multi-AP issues in a congested environment? So yes, if you're in physical proximity and the frames come across, clear, if you're actually able to capture them. So it's a shared medium. So any frame that's coming along, you'll pick up on that channel. But what typically happens in your congested environment, say a dense design, is that the AP next to you is at a different channel. So I've got, say a radio, and I'm on the channel I'm looking at, but those APs all around me, right, by design are on a different channel. So it can be difficult to get those. However, we do build systems. If you remember that DEF CON picture, he's picking up all channels. So pretty much any AP around him, he'll pick up, and he can certainly get those, that type of traffic and pull it in. Yeah, but it's also overload, right? You can have hundreds and hundreds of gigs and terabytes of traffic quite quickly because you're on all those different channels and you have all that extra traffic to deal with. So it builds up fast, and then you need techniques to be able to search it, sort it, filter it. And as I told you, like a lot of these other tools that are very nice, and I'm actually envious. I have to work in the wireless space most of the time. That's where I spend most of my time, but I don't get to use these tools because they don't support 802.11. So what happens in an environment where you have hundreds of APs, such as New York City, Times Square? You're in a big problem. You have a lot of trouble. You're going to get a lot of traffic coming in, and it can compete, and you'd have to, do your best. That's all I can say. But also, where you capture matters. So if you want to see what a client or stay may see, you want to capture next to the client. So you'd stand next to the client and capture, say, or put your capture system right next to the client. If you want the AP's point of view, maybe you go next to the AP and you can kind of see what he thinks is happening, how the stations are behaving, and as the signal comes in. So that's all I can say. You're just going to get a lot of traffic, and sounds like you're going to have a lot of bad FCS, frame check sequence, if you have that many APs in one spot. And I know open air is difficult anyway. Like for instance, anybody who does any work in the stadiums, I don't work in stadiums, but I know that that's a big deal, and the way they have to do special antennas and things to manage that kind of traffic. So you can have a strong signal but not be able to get anywhere. Remember that what's the critical resource we're chasing here is that we always run out of is channel utilization. You can only go to 100%, and imagine that's like time, right? And so you want to send something, the higher the data rate, the lower the amount of time it takes for you to send that amount of data. That's good. That then allows the channel to go off and be available for someone else. But once you hit 100% channel utilizations, nothing's coming through. And that's kind of what we're chasing here. So usually capture filters, what's your usual setup hardware to capture roaming issues? So I have some laptops where I take a USB hub, a small one. I don't have a picture of it, but imagine small USB hub with some Velcro. And I've got Velcro on the back of my laptop, and I'll put a couple of adapters on the back of the laptop here. I'm pointing to it. You probably can't see, right? And I've got a couple of adapters. So I'll go in the area where they're having trouble, and I'll do a little survey, and I'll figure out, say, he'll tell me, hey, when I walk down this hall, I lose connectivity. Well, so I'll figure out what channels those APs are on. I can ask them and they'll tell me, but I'm going to reverse engineer it anyway. I'll figure out what channels they're on, and then I'll set my channels appropriately, and then I'll have them go do a roam test. And that's how I follow. And I'll do that by, capturing on multiple channels at the same time. Both Linux and even some of the other software packages in Windows allow that. Again, the Mac's tough because it only has the one radio. But on the other systems we can, and I'll bring all that traffic into the same, capture file using like dump cap. I actually don't use Wireshark that often for a capture. I'm always using dump cap because I don't want to lose traffic. I don't want to risk that. If it's small and I know what I'm looking for, I'll use Wireshark directly to capture, but that's kind of the exception, not the rule. So you set up dump cap, grab all the different adapters, bring them all in, and then he'll say, yep, we lost traffic. I'll see it. And then I'll go analyze offline, with a rough timestamp. You can usually find it, and I'll just sort by MAC address. I'll want the MAC address of him. His BSS ID will change, but we'll be able to see him, say, probing as he's trying to find the other access point. I do use WLAN Pi. I have one. It's kind of nice. And I have seen the XCAP interface. It's pretty cool. But again, it's one radio. So we were thinking actually of putting those in the office to troubleshoot, because we test in our office with Wi-Fi. So the WLAN Pi was kind of cool along those lines. So go ahead, Sherry. Would like to answer this question live. Okay, well, I guess that's it. So any other questions? Our mesh network's different? Not really, no. Just the APs are communicating with each other, say with a different radio. So hopefully a different radio. Otherwise, I don't really like to do that. I don't like that mesh so much, that where you have that one radio that's both in AP manage mode and station mode. Cut your bandwidth like right in half immediately. So that's not preferred. But when you have a backhaul link, yeah, that's all fine. Yeah, it's all good. And you just have to know what channels you're on. Some do backhauls with 5 gigahertz and exposed 2.4. A lot of the high-end systems now might have 3 or 4 radios. You can do 2 5 gigahertz that are far enough apart, and a 2.4. Maybe one's a backhaul, maybe one's a security radio, things like that to do the off-channel scanning or to look for events or threats and other things. So it's good questions. Good questions. Anything in the chat? Anything in the chat? No, no. Anyway, okay, you have my email. If you have any questions, hopefully we'll do more of this. I enjoy the Wi-Fi aspect. Again, I think it's a little bit niche, but anyway, I think it's becoming more and more important in the world we live in. We're moving towards more wireless stuff. So no more questions. Go ahead and give you 10 more minutes back of your day. So thank you. Have a good day.